Sie können mir eine ganz banale Frage beantworten. Warum in Gottes Namen spricht man eigentlich von Orphan Drugs?
Orphan, das ist eine gute Frage. Also Orphan im Sinne von viele Krankheiten, die nennt sich ja seltene Krankheiten.
Richtig, genau.
Aber Orphan Drugs, weil es einfach so wenige sind.
Also wie die Waisen sozusagen.
Genau, die immer vergessen werden. Das,
ich meine nicht, dass ich da jetzt in der Tiefe drüber sprechen wollte, aber ich bin nur drüber gestolpert.
Ja, oder If the corona crisis has taught us one thing, is that the European Union is actually not that bad when it comes to producing vaccines, for example, but also in the sense that supply chains don't actually exist to such an extent anymore, and that certain regulations have to be rethought. This is what we're going to discuss today under the topic how to strengthen the healthcare industry ecosystem. And I welcome you to this discussion. First of all, I'm going to hand over to Uwe Becker and back to Wiesbaden. Ladies and gentlemen, dear Ms. Schreiber, dear Dr. Schulte, dear Ms. Buxo, dear Mr. Kafsack, I'm very pleased to be able to welcome you to this event today, where together with Sanofi, we have invited you to. Thank you also to the team of Sanofi for having prepared the meeting together with us. Even if the pandemic and the limitations that were connected with that are somewhat behind us, but still the topic of healthcare is still a very current topic and is very relevant for European society and also for Hesse. Hesse has a large tradition as the so-called pharmacy of the world, and this dates back to the 19th century, where the pharmaceutical industry found its origin. A very significant part of pharmaceutical production made in Germany was the strong networking between all of the actors in our federal state, and this is something that we are very proud of. And in 2013, we have been the first federal state that created an initiative with regards to the healthcare industry, and therefore the connection between our pharmaceutical industry, our very much engaged society, have yielded the result of this very successful industry. In comparison to other federal states, Hesse is the #1 in the pharmaceutical industry. The very important points that the pandemic has shown us will be part of the discussion today. The production of masks, the research with regards to pharmaceuticals, medical products, all of these are keywords that have and will be discussed in our society and that will be discussed today. And where we have actually very much experience the difficulties connected to these topics. And today we're going to ask ourselves the question, with which measures can we actually achieve a continued good healthcare support in Europe and also in Hesse? I wish us all therefore a very interesting and fruitful discussion. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Mr. Becker. And now we're going to go from Wiesbaden via Brussels to Berlin. And this is where Kristin Schreiber has joined our discussion, Director for Chemicals Health. And she is going to provide a short keynote presentation on the topic. And this is from the perspective of the European Commission. Since 1997, she has been a member of the European Commission. She has been a part of the cabinets of Verheugen and others. And over to you, Ms. Schreiber.
We can't hear the lady, there's no sound. We can't hear Mrs. Schreiber in the booth. Could you please check with the technique?
Positive lesson from the crisis, as it improved our capacities to be better prepared for future health challenges and forthcoming sanitary crises, which will come again. Of course, the fight continues, and today's event is there to remind us how much we need to continue working together with the European industry to ensure the resilience of our health ecosystem. So the question of resilience and Europe's autonomy regarding the supply of certain basic medicines has been on the table for quite some time. But the outbreak of the pandemic was a real wake-up call. We were all taken off guard. It revealed Europe's long-term vulnerabilities across all industrial ecosystems, including, obviously, the health ecosystem. But from day one, Europe has shown, I think, incredible resourcefulness. Not only did we collectively provide an emergency response to this unprecedented crisis by keeping borders open and addressing the most pressing issues for free movement of essential medicines within our single market. I think we also won largely the battle of vaccine production. In constant cooperation with all member states and all key manufacturers, we worked within the Task Force Industrial Scale-Up for the COVID-19 Vaccine and Therapeutics, our TEFIS, at mapping our untapped capacities, assessing and addressing bottlenecks along the supply chains, and triggering new industrial partnerships. And today's results are here. The European Union is one of the world's leading producers of COVID-19 vaccines, and its supply chains are secured. We have produced more than 3.1 billion vaccines for our citizens and for the world. And the EU is the #1 exporter of COVID-19 related vaccines in the world, with more than 2 billion doses of finished vaccines exported to 165 countries worldwide. More should be done, of course, to accompany vulnerable third countries which have less developed health infrastructures and cannot rely on a solid pharmaceutical industry. And of course, I have particularly in mind Africa as a continent has the ambition and the opportunity to become more autonomous in vaccine production as well. And the European Union supports this ambition. And this should not be limited to vaccines. The development of local production capacity for key medicines and medical devices in Africa is equally important. So over the past year, we have already laid a strong foundation as part of the Team Europe actions. We support local manufacturing initiatives throughout the continent, from Senegal to South Africa. And recently, on the occasion of the EU-Africa Business Forum and the EU-Africa Summit, we announced the launch of a matchmaking event to foster EU-Africa industrial partnerships. And this event will be held in mid-2022. So I think we have learned a lot from the pandemic. First of all, our vulnerabilities, but also our, I think, strong ability to mobilize and deploy in record time all our industrial strengths to meet the challenge of vaccination collectively. And there will be other health crises. There will be future disruptions and shortages in the supply chains. And the Commission is working on improving our preparedness and ability to react quickly to future health threats. So as you may know, in the framework of the pharmaceutical strategy, the Commission initiated a structured dialogue on the security of supply of medicines with all the relevant actors of the health ecosystem, from pharma companies to health professionals, from patients' representatives to hospitals, academia, and Krankenkassen. The purpose of this structured dialogue was to better identify, understand, and anticipate our dependencies and our potential vulnerabilities when disruptions or shortages occur in the supply chain. And we will soon move to the definition of policy options to address the findings of this structured dialogue. And we need to take our capacity to anticipate crisis to another level. Therefore, we launched in October last year HERA, the European Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority. Overall, HERA will improve the Union's development, manufacturing, procurement, and distribution of key medical countermeasures needed in case of a health emergency. HERA has a very strong industrial dimension. HERA will bring together member states, industry, and all relevant stakeholders in a common effort to address the availability of medical countermeasures in case of health threats, and to further encourage new industrial partnerships. And most importantly, HERA will also be an essential lever to mobilize and deploy our industrial capacity. And here I'm referring to the EU FAB project, which you're certainly familiar with. It will establish a network of ever-warm multi-technology production capacities for vaccines and therapeutics throughout Europe. And should a new health crisis arise, these capacities will be mobilized immediately. And we also need to strengthen the resilience of supply chains for crisis-relevant medical countermeasures. Here we need to work with industry to address bottlenecks and supply chain dependencies within and outside the EU. And a joint industrial cooperation forum will be established very soon to ensure regular and systematic exchanges with the industry. And obviously, for our industry to become more agile, more autonomous, and more competitive, we must continue in parallel to support its innovative edge, especially when it comes to digitization. I think Europe has nothing to prove regarding its research and development excellence. However, we would all agree, I think, that there is plenty of room for improvement on competitiveness and industrial scale-up. And it's paramount that we focus our efforts on helping our startups and our innovative SMEs reach the business opportunities to work more closely with big companies. And we have carried out several initiatives that I believe will be game-changing. I have in mind the Innovative Health Initiative, a joint undertaking launched under the Horizon Europe Research and Innovation Program, and on whose board I am. The Innovative Health Initiative is laying the ground for an EU-wide health research and innovation ecosystem that will enable more systematically the translation of scientific knowledge into tangible innovation, addressing the diseases that are highly burdensome for patients and society as a whole, from obesity to breast and prostate cancer or asthma, for example. And it brings together universities, companies large and small around cross-sectoral projects involving the biopharmaceutical, biotechnological, and medical technological sectors. And IHI will put more emphasis on cross-sectoral projects involving the different sectors, including companies active in the digital area. And the IHI industry partners will be COSIR, FPR, Europa Bio, MedTech Europe, and Vaccines Europe. So the total budget proposed for IHI is substantial. It's 2.4 billion euro. And the European Union will contribute up to 1.2 billion to IHI to match the contributions of the industry partner and the contributing partners. And the EU funds will come from Horizon Europe. So with this example, I would like to underline that the European level provides the necessary critical mass to scale up our innovative strengths and turn it into industrial leadership. And in the same spirit, the Commission is facilitating the development of what we call IPCIs, Important Projects of Common European Interests, or PIEC in French. This state aid instrument supports member states in pooling their investment efforts into breakthrough innovation when the market alone cannot do it. And in the area of health, the IPCI will mobilize public and private funding for cross-border disruptive industrial projects, contributing therefore to the reaffirmation of our industrial leadership. And earlier this month, 16 member states took at ministerial level a commitment for the launch of a health IPCI. And more member states are expected to join later this endeavor. And this IPCI will address specific market failures in three main areas: innovating and greening production technologies and processes for medicines. Second, innovation in antimicrobial resistance and rare diseases, as well as an emerging health threat, where it's complementary to HERA. And I think especially the antimicrobial resistance is such an important topic, which is really important to be tackled in this context. And then the third area is cell and gene therapies. And we in the Commission will continue to facilitate the preparation of the future health IPCI, but I would like to stress that this is a process driven by the member states. And I'm really confident that this initiative will help increase the resilience and strategic autonomy of Europe's health industrial ecosystem, which I think is at the core also of the debate we're having today. And in order to conclude, finally, I would also like to briefly touch upon the digital transformation of health. And here we all know that there's a pressing need for Europe to harness here the digital transition. And we also know that the digital transformation of healthcare will be key to help us find new medical solutions, to track the spread of infection, and also increase the efficiencies of healthcare systems. We have all seen it with the tracing apps, with teleconsultations, remote monitoring, or a common health record exchange. So the market of e-health will grow dramatically in the years to come. And European companies must reap the fruit of this upcoming expansion. And there are still some barriers hindering our progress, such as the issue of health data interoperability, or the lack of digital infrastructure and of digital skills more generally in the EU. So therefore, the Commission has proposed a digital compass with a set of measures and milestones that should help us tackle all those issues in the coming years. So these were just a couple of points I wanted to flag at the outset in my impulse statement, and I'm now looking forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Schreiber, für diesen Schnelldurchlauf durch die europäische Pharmapolitik, wenn man es so formulieren darf. Ich darf noch kurz jetzt an dieser Stelle darauf hinweisen, dass Sie von Seiten Ihres Bildschirms Fragen stellen können, jederzeit natürlich per Telefon, per E-Mail. Die Adressen sollten eingeblendet worden sein. Und darf jetzt meine Panelisten...
You can ask questions by telephone or by email, and you're going to see the email address and the telephone number at the bottom. And I'm going to invite my guests on stage. We have one panelist from Berlin, Ms. Schreiber, and now you can see two human beings here on stage with me, and I'm going to present them to you. First of all, Manuela Buxo, a Catalan name, as I just learned. She works for Sanofi Specialty Care. She has been a member of staff at Sanofi for 8 years. Previously, she worked with Bayer. Therefore, she has a lot of experience in the industry. And on her left side, we can see Norbert Schultes from the permanent representation head of the energy department. And he has worked there for a number of years. And we're going to move straight into our discussion. Ms. Schreiber, if we start with you, she talked about what is being done in detail, IPCIs, on the pharmaceutical strategy. And on the other hand, she was also talking about successes when we talk about the fight over vaccines. So that could actually lead us to leaning back and saying, well, everything is fine, and we can actually end the event. Or do you actually have a few negative aspects to talk about? Yes, well, obviously the pharmaceutical industry, or the locations Europe and Germany, are very attractive sites for the pharmaceutical industry. But on the other hand, due to the pandemic, but also beforehand, we have seen that there are definitely weaknesses that we have to tackle. And I think this is what we should talk about here today. First of all, yes, of course, there are a lot of strengths, and these have actually gained more strengths through the pandemic. But on the other hand, in a competition together with other regions in Europe, I think we do have some disadvantages. For example, the US actually invests 4 times as the EU does in research and development. There is a lot more investments in research and development. And we as a company, for example, if we look at Germany as a business location, we contribute to the gross domestic product with 4 billion euros, and we create hundreds, thousands of jobs. And we actually reinvest 33% of our value creation back into research and development. But we are actually in Germany on the 5th place with regards to clinical studies. Actually, Spain, for example, does more in that area. And in terms of biotech companies, we are also just in 5th place. Therefore, I think we have to invest. We have to see more investments in Germany and in the European Union in comparison with the US and China. Therefore, so far, it's just a question of investments. Therefore, it's just plainly said a matter of money. Yes, from my perspective, it should be giving and taken. Obviously, we have to invest in the pharmaceutical industry, but at the same time, the location also has to be attractive. And perhaps other countries or regions provide better incentives when it comes to that topic. It's not just about seeing pharmaceutical industry as an industry, but also what can the pharmaceutical industry contribute to the economy, to the citizens' welfare, and to research. And perhaps sometimes we just look at the single elements too much. Mr. Schulte, do you agree? Or are we actually somewhat blindsided by the success of the vaccine strategy? And should we not just lean back and tell ourselves that we did a good job? Well, my impression has been that from a global economic perspective with regards to the pharmaceutical industry, I think we can actually be proud of what we've achieved both in Germany and in the European Union. We've been very active in that field. That is correct. Companies have to invest, but it is my impression
Standort.
We are talking about our site, and I guess we do not need only public financing, but what we are hearing from the companies, these are elements like they need qualified people. And we have also the procedures, and this is something that we are seeing also on the governmental side. Before we are talking or go deeper, I would like to hear something about the analysis. You would say there is a need to act, or would you say we're not that bad? Could we then think about the next step? I guess it's both. Well, we are still in a very good position, but in order to go along with the future, we should work on it, and this is the financial part. We have to look what is useful and necessary, and on the other hand, also on the level of the different procedures. These are things that we should see. Mrs. Schreiber, when I can play the ball back to Berlin, there's differences, not only nuances, because add a little bit more is different than what we are talking about right now. No, now, should we just relax and lean back, or as Mrs. Buxo said, we might be detached from others and then in the competition, be in the competition with China and the US? Yes, thank you very much. I'm in Berlin today. I'm not, normally I'm in Brussels. And what I try to explain Obviously, we have several problems and we have to do a lot in order to keep a track. And we need a big autonomy in our supply chains, but we should also accept and see that during the pandemic we learned a lot, and we learned our lesson that because we want to be prepared better for the future, and we took up a lot. And I don't think that we should just lean back as far as vaccines are concerned. In some parts, we should create new approaches. We have a lot of opportunities with our research programs, and Mrs. Buxo will be agreeing. Very often, we do not always realize a good market product, and we have to do a lot, and therefore we have in the different parts the IPCAIs, or in order also to say that we can have a structure here. And I think that the classical market for pharmaceuticals, we are coming from a very high level. When I started in the Commission, which was 1990, 6 years I studied genetics, and we always said we have to be careful that this advantage will not be lost, especially in the pharmaceutical sector. This is often the case, and in the supply chains we have all seen that are even more questions that we can't talk about tonight. But with the pandemic, it has become clear how easy it is to interrupt everything, and how international these chains are, and how this can lead to big problems. And this was not clear to everybody, and not everybody in politics talked about it, even if we already had problems for different pharmaceuticals or essential medicines. And therefore, it is good that we have an awareness that maybe we didn't have before the pandemic. Mrs. Buxo, I'm right back to you, but only a couple of points. We have talked about 3 things. First of all, the crisis, where you have to be able to supply the supply chains. And Mrs. Buxo talked about how to maintain this place here in Europe. The third point is for you something very important and urgent too. Well, yes, because I understood it as the most important topic. At the third point, as far as this is concerned, we do need to react, because we are very good in the research, but we see also that with the scale-ups, we are not as leading as we have been before, and there is a whole there are many reasons for it, and part of it is obviously is in the DG, and there are many points that are important for legislation, and it is really a lot of things. If you see what opportunities do you have, and probably we will discuss this afterwards, and I'm agreeing that this is very important, that we act and react. Now, 2 of my panelists wanted the floor. Mrs. Buxo, you wanted to react on one point, especially as far as the crisis concerned Mrs. Schreiber is talking about. I think it's very important to agree how important and quickly we acted, and how the partnership was. And I'm agreeing that not only we learned a lot, it was very pragmatic, and we worked together very good with politics, with the European Commission. Everybody was coming in, and we tried to solve the problem or to find a solution as soon as possible. But yes, it's two different pair of shoes. And you would say this and then say, but, right? As far as the site for the future, we have to enhance it for the future in order to be attractive in the international trade. Yes, there we should intervene. And Mr. Schultes, maybe it would be interesting and positive if we take the concept pharma side and Germany, if we just bring it down and see what kind of products we are talking about. If we have highly productive products, then we are really leading, and I learned preparing here, if we are talking about generic medicine, there we have more fights, let's say, and in the highest, in the peaks with the pandemic, with the masks, and I lived in Japan for several years, even if you have a slight flu. And before the pandemic, one package with 50 masks did cost 450 yen, which means one mask did cost 7 cents. And they were imported from China. And then at a certain point we had we were asked to produce masks in Germany. How can you do this with a cost of 7 euro cent per mask? And we really have to distinguish what products we are talking about. Are these really the innovative parts like the vaccines or the simple masks? And obviously, the production sites are completely different one from the other. But just to come back on this, but for example, when you have the the 3 levels, you should concentrate on the high level. But if you speak about generica and the masks, then we leave this in the hand of the Chinese. The question is if we can go ahead with the same approach. But obviously we should really see the highest level. We have excellent researchers in Europe, in Germany, and this should be our main perspective. And Mrs. Buxo, I think you will go the same way, Mrs. Schreiber. I don't know if she was talking about cell therapy and genetics, but what she talked about, very often we do have problems in order to go ahead. And is this then really, is it really enough to invest in transnational research in order to work on it? You already talked about the regulations and the framework conditions. It's not a simple solution, but there are some steps on which you can work and where you have to invest into, and especially in highly innovative pharmaceuticals. And there I do agree. Now, then we should see concretely what we do need. Mrs. Schreiber already said it. I heard we are innovative, but we are not managing to really have a product that might be successful on the market. It's already 20 years I'm in Brussels, and I guess I heard it for the first time in 2005, and now I'm listening to the same thing during the last 17 years. And we know the problem, but we do not know how to find a solution. What is lacking? Don't we have enough risk capital? And now I see that we might need more money from the government, and this is a little bit maybe what you are thinking about. Well, definitely the idea, public-private partnerships. This is an idea. It can be IPKI or HERA that we should follow, and their money from the government is part of it, but it's not only this, but we also, the autonomy of Europe for the supply chains. It's not only about research that we say we have to invest in research and development, but we also need European capacities. And we are not looking only at research, but we look at research, the industry part, and then to topics like how can I apply all this? How can I define the price? How can I bring all the products on the market? These are the topics, and from my point of view, we are thinking in blocks instead of seeing the whole picture. And Mrs. Schreiber, I guess she was talking about it when she said there were bottlenecks, because sometimes when we need pharmaceuticals, we are concentrating too much on the price, and therefore we have a lot of things that have been brought to other countries. You need quality, you need to have different suppliers, and all the bottlenecks we have seen should be avoided. The industrial capacity is a very important part of the whole thing. Mr. Schultes, let's stick with the supply chains. Isn't this really what the companies should do? That this supply chains are interesting. Just to talk about the pharmacy of Hesse, I would say yes, but say yes, and then you say why there is a but. Obviously, as a state, we need to help out. You were talking about the framework conditions. The framework conditions have to be okay, and we have seen in a completely different part, in the energy part, we see how extreme the problems are that we have when we are too dependent of a state that is delivering. I guess the economic politics has to take care with a dialogue together with the industry in order not to have dependencies that would be a damage for our economics. But I come back now to the yes. Obviously, this has to be the starting point from the companies that know their structures, and then they decided on at a certain point in time to have products from other countries. And this was not a decision from the state, but the question is the one about the role of the state. And we have a debate what the strategic autonomy means. Do we need more industrial policy, like with a French approach? because I'm obviously working for a liberal newspaper, but the ecosystem is something Breton loves this word. Do we need a stronger approach from the state? Because this was what I wanted to know 10 or 15 years ago when we were talking about the Lisbon strategy. I do not know if even somebody knows this in order to make Europe to the most important state and representative. Does the state need to do more? Mrs. Schreiber will need to answer too. Well, I have to approach with the 14 industrial ecosystems. And during the next time, we have to see how this can be done. And on the other hand, we have of the IPCEIs, and these are elements that give the state a stronger role. But in principle, in the ecosystems, we have to wait what will be happening. And with the IPCEIs or the IPCEIs, we have the principle that this has to happen together with the companies. We already have some experience with the microelectronic part, but there are also others like cloud computing, and now the proposition of the French part in the health sector. Now, this might be an instrument, but it's not a common financing. The conditions are clear and they are strict. They are well defined, and we need innovative procedures. We do need several member states to participate. There is a stronger control from the European Commission, and so I think there are enough restrictions in order to make all this function. Mrs. Schreiber, I would like to come back to this point. Is this what we need to learn from the experience in the last few years, that we need a stronger industrial policy? And I say, like, French approach, and in the Commission we can discuss, and we discussed about different things, but is this maybe what the Commission is approaching? In 2020, we were preparing the new industrial policy with an SME approach, which is very needed and liked in Germany. Well, we always have a pendulum, or sometimes we talk about more about this pendulum of ecosystem, because ecosystem is quite difficult to translate in German. We would probably talk about sectors. And the approach here, this is coming from the French, and it's really to see a sector with upstream and downstream. How are the supply chains working in a certain sector, and what is happening with the skills? What do we see at the universities, and how can you bring the startups to the academic part? And the idea is, and this is to have a holistic approach, and not only cars, but what is connected with this, and how can we, at the long term, for health, how can we answer this question that has been already introduced, that for a long term, for Germany and Europe in this case, we have this innovation with the investments and the industrial policy, maybe, yes, but we also have things that are developing, and I guess there are many ideas that might also correspond to the German industry, especially that we are looking at the fact what opportunities do we have in these different sectors. And we had a horizontal approach, because before I worked here, I was working for middle-sized companies, but it's very important to have all these points in the different sectors. This might maybe be the first thing. And now, as far as the supply chains are concerned, we are not in a planned economy and are planning the supply chains for everybody, but we already heard it. Thanks to the help we are giving, we can have situations that are not positive, especially if you are only looking at the price and nothing else. Then we have many things that are not able to be on the market, and we need a consensus on the innovative aspects. And I think that the pandemic and the crisis showed us that we can't avoid to have other aspects, but we should be able, and that we have capacities to have these not necessarily high-tech products not being dependent, for example, for genericals from only one state, and the crisis confirmed it, and the state is therefore should deliver, because supply chains are not known, because the companies are not talking about, because the companies don't want to say where their things and their products are coming from. Obviously, there are also advantages for them, and we have seen when all got transparent that things they imported some substance from South America, then we are in Europe, then it goes back to the US, then it's going to South Africa. These supply chains are really complex, and there obviously the state can intervene, and then you don't have the vaccine coming back, and the whole discussions were there with the US and with others, and I guess the state at a certain point, and also the European dimension is requested in order not to have a monolithical dependency from several regions. And with the APKs, I think, and I also underlined it, the Commission and the GD Grow, we back all this, and we are not those who are getting into the initiative, and there we have the control in the GD competition, because it should be something that is related to the market. I guess this is also a good approach, and Mr. Schultes, we have also hydrogen, which is working properly, and this PPPs are not the only way. We also have the innovative health initiative, where Commission and industrial partners are involved. And all this is an interesting way. It's not the only one, but it gives several perspectives to have a decisive research, and that you can bring this at a positive point. As you all already mentioned all this, in the last few years, did we make the error to look too much on the costs and not to see the industrial policy behind it? I do think so, and we have so many aspects, and obviously it's clear if we have a hospital where the costs are very important, well, we have different aspects, and we have also environmental aspects where you're not thinking about probably, but they have an important place, and they are not too strong in the pharmaceutical part, but we should have a more global aspect, and we will not say 40% have to come from Europe. We are open, an open economy, but we should have a diversification, and this is very important, and this is one of the lessons that we have taken from the crisis. We are not talking only about pharmaceuticals, we have the discussion also with the war in Ukraine and Russia, because we see that all things that are needed for agriculture are coming from one place only, and there we should have a common approach and view without saying what exactly who has to do what. But we should have a bit more of transparency, and the supply security in the pharmaceutical part I was talking about this. This is an important question. We want to have more transparency. Where are we dependent, and which might be the problems inclusively if you are talking, for example, about a war. And I will not go back to this. Now, would you you write the same strategy that we had in 2020, because there was like an idea of lowering the costs, or was this only the perception that we journalists had from this pharmaceutical strategy? I have seen the Commission wants to lower the costs and to make everything more green.
Wie gesagt, die Pharma, ich kann nur so viel dazu, das heißt,
Yes, of course. I do think that the pharmaceutical strategy can still exist, but I think there are certain aspects with today's experience we probably would have taken different decisions in the past. Yes, that I would definitely say. Okay, Ms. Schreiber, you can take a breath. Mr. Schulte, just to talk again about costs, and this is what governments or institutions are often accused of, that it is just about costs and about lowering costs. Do you accept that, or would you actually say that this is not correct? I don't think anyone has an interest in just looking at costs. But I think it is always important to take a look at the whole picture. And I think it is about the quality performance ratio that we have to look at. And that was also the question that you asked to Ms. Schreiber. It is not just about looking at the price. And I think from those times when we're just looking at costs, I think we have moved on from that. And also, in order to come back to the supply chain structures, I think companies can only set up new supply chains if they look at the entire picture and not just at costs. If you cannot move away from just looking at the price, you will miss certain aspects. and companies will not be able to diversify or to enlarge supply chains. That would be my opinion on that question. Therefore, you would say, yes, perhaps in the past we have perhaps focused too much on that matter, and we don't have to drill deeper into that question. Perhaps governments in the past have been too much focused on the price, but should have perhaps focused on other things instead. Well, we have already talked about the fact that governments should be involved to a further extent, but obviously also the government, both the federal government and the government of the federal state Hesse and the European Union. Ms. Buxo, what do you think are the most important points that we should focus on for the moment? If we look at France, for example, they have their own strategy with their 2030 goals that they set for themselves. Who should act? Probably, perhaps all of us should act in a certain manner, but how should we control all of that? Well, I think these actions should happen on a national level, both in Germany and obviously the federal government. First of all, I think it's great that this has been included in the coalition treaty. This is a very important pillar. The pharmaceutical industry is a very important pillar in Germany's economy. It is a sector that actually contributes to economic growth, and therefore also at a national level in Germany, it is important to provide an impulse. But also, this has to happen on a European level. Ms. Schreiber just mentioned this. The European Chips Act is a very good example. This is where the European member states came together and decided to become a leading supplier of chips in the European Union. At the moment, we are at 9%. That should actually increase to 20% over the next years, and we would like to take up a leading role with regards to that. It's not just about production capacity. It is also about research, development, innovation, about industry capacities. And this also includes specific funds of, I think, 11 billion. But it's just about it's also about the ecosystem that Ms. Schreiber talked about, which is very important. It's not just about one topic. It's about investing upstream and downstream, and where a system for Europe is being created and where these companies can actually be successful. Obviously, this is just one example. It is different for other sectors. Obviously, what chips industry needs is something different than the pharmaceutical industry or other sectors, as we mentioned.
Und die Frau Schreiber sprach ja auch, dass es da auch Beispiele gibt, wo
Unfortunately, we can no longer hear the original sound due to a background noise.
Geht mein Mikro nicht?
My microphone is not working. But I think there are also some tendencies on a national level with regards to framework conditions on the topic of cost reductions, and we also about accelerated authorization procedures. I think we do have a lot of actions that are needed, but I think it has to be at national and European level. I'm just going to speak a little more slowly, but it seems that that it is working and I can be heard. But do we actually need a European Pharmaceutical Act? And what should we actually include? Well, of course, I'm not going to throw any numbers around today, but I think it would be useful for the attractiveness of the European Union as an industry location to actually link our goals to specific principles that can actually be maintained. So the CHIPS Act that I just mentioned could perhaps also be set up for the pharmaceutical industry. So this is something that I'm going to hand over to Ms. Schreiber. Is that something that you're already working on? Did you write down what was just being said? Well, the approach that was just mentioned by Ms. Buxo, I think, is a good one. I think the CHIPS Act was a huge project, also with rather concrete goals. Since chips obviously play an important role in a number of sectors in the pharmaceutical industries, I think with some of the projects that we have already initiated, I think we can achieve quite a lot. Obviously, it is also there is also going to be a regulatory debate that I'm not going to go into much detail on here, but I haven't understood Ms. Buxo in that way that she was actually asking for a European Pharma Act, but I think she was rather asking for specific opportunities that we can create. And that perhaps, together with the current initiatives that we have already started, we can perhaps adjust them in order to provide more benefits to the industry. But these are all very important questions and obviously play an important role in the sense of reliable supply chains and so on. But wouldn't it be a good idea if we could actually provide more specific goals, such as to increase production? For example, I'm not sure if this can actually be achieved. Perhaps I'm a little cynical if I think that this wouldn't be possible. But perhaps we could just try. Yeah. Well, obviously, we had a debate with regards to the numbers of the vaccines, and obviously, you probably followed this discussion together with the task force that was actually working day and night back then, and that is actually still existent, and that is now actually looking at the vaccine situation in other countries, and they actually looked at the question, how can we actually set ourselves goals in the sense that how can we achieve a certain amount of vaccines by a certain date? Well, we could perhaps set up percentages that we would like to become the #1 with regards to innovative medicines. But it's not just about numbers, about volumes. It's rather about being an innovative region for the industry. But perhaps if I could ask a question myself, can I just ask, is that your demand that we actually create a European Pharma Act? Well, Ms. Buxo, that way, actually, the trip here to Brussels has already paid off for you, perhaps. Well, what do you think? Do we need an equivalent, a Pharma Act? Or shouldn't we actually start setting up acts for every single sector? Well, I don't think that we should actually set up a relevant European act for all of the 14 individual sectors that exist from the Commission. I think that the act that was initiated with regards to the semiconductor chips was a unique project, and the European Chips Act shouldn't it is not the case that the European Chips Act, once it comes into effect, actually solves all the problems. Obviously, there are still questions that remain. For example, the question of funding. And what I also heard is that the question whether this is going to lead to a production of the relevant chips, this is also a question that remains open. There are questions about what kind of chips have to be produced, which kind of chips production should be funded. These are all questions that are being raised at the same time, and where these kind of questions, industry questions, are actually being raised to the government. Well, and if we have a European Pharma Act, perhaps the same questions we would actually have to ask ourselves. And therefore, the act itself does not necessarily lead to the problems being solved. The main task or the main work that remains to be done is the one being done by the companies and the individual regions. Ms. Buxo, you can see that the suggestion has not received much enthusiasm. Perhaps you can provide some more arguments. The other question is, the question that was raised was, are we actually going to produce the chips that we will need in the end? The question is also, can this be translated into the pharmaceutical industry? Well, as I have already mentioned, for me, the declaration of intent of all member states was important. The fact that they all decided to go along that path, and that they would provide support to this industry. Obviously, this kind of act cannot be translated directly into the pharmaceutical industry. What Ms. Schreiber has already also mentioned is that how can we increase the attractiveness of Europe as a region for pharmaceutical industry? And if we come back to IPCEI once again, and if I may also refer to Germany once again, IPCEI Health, a number of member states have already signed, and Germany is still thinking about this. And I just think that Germany is such an important region with regards to that industry, and it should be a country that supports this very same industry. And this is a role that Germany should be conscious of. And obviously, the CHIPS Act is one thing, but on the other hand, there are a number of topics that are very concrete. IPCEI is one of them that is very concrete. And obviously, also there, not all of the member states are actually part of this. Well, actually, all of the countries have joined, France, Spain, and a number of Well, we have heard that 16 countries joined IPCEI. The Netherlands, with a substantial economic strength, also joined IPCEI, but Germany hasn't. Why? Well, we have participated during the setup, also in close exchange with our French colleagues, since autumn last year. And in March this year, at the beginning of this year, a declaration of intent was issued by the 16 member states, and this is something that we couldn't join, since this was also linked to certain funding questions, and this was during the period of budget consultations, and therefore we weren't able to join. But this doesn't mean that we would not join at a later stage. This was perhaps a slightly more defensive argumentation that I would have anticipated. I would have thought that you'd say it's just a matter of time. Well, it's a matter of time, but also a matter of funding questions. Well, €1 can always only be spent once, but we are going to see. As we'd usually say, it is in review. Well, in that case, we're going to wait what is going to happen, but it's not the case that we said, well, that we said from the beginning that we wouldn't join. But in fact, with regard to the content of this declaration, we actually participated very closely. Therefore, you just said that you're not per se against it. It is just a question of funding. And it is a question of where the money can be found. Perhaps another special budget in Essen or Wiesbaden or wherever. Well, Ms. Buxo, is the IPCEI therefore the so-called golden path? Since we talked about that on a European level, the CHIPS Act, is that the solution of the problem? No. Well, as I said, there is not just one solution. There is also the topic, when we come back to public-private partnerships beyond IPCEI, obviously there are a number of good examples where companies and universities and hospitals have created partnerships in order to work on a common project. And this is also something that can be invested in as a state, as a government, or another institution. We already talked about the initiative of the healthcare industry in Hessen. In my opinion, this is actually a pioneering project, a role model where a federal state can get involved together with universities and other institutions in order to set up projects. I don't think it is without reason that Hesse is actually the leading federal state with regards to the pharmaceutical industries. And I think there are a number of other good examples to that extent. IPCEI is one building block, but I think there are a number of them. I think we shouldn't focus too much on IPCEI. It is one instrument with clear criteria. And what I already mentioned at the beginning, I think it wouldn't be just, it wouldn't do justice to the branch, to the industry if we just focus on IPCEI. It is just one singular instrument which can help you. But I think the industry has so many facets that it wouldn't be too close-minded to just focus on IPCEI. At this point, one more comment, one more remark on the fact that you can actually ask questions. Everybody who wishes to do so can join in our discussion, and I would actually pass on your questions. This is just a quick disclaimer in case that anybody would say at the end that they wanted to actually join in the discussion but couldn't. Well, we have already mentioned that the European level is the one actually holding all of this together. Do you feel that the member states beyond IPCEI that we just talked about, do you think that there is actually enough initiative from the member states, or do you think that actually the Commission has to do all the work? Well, I think we do have a different consciousness in different countries. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, but obviously we do have a number of other challenges with regards to financial stability of the healthcare assurance system, and the problems that we can see in individual member states are very diverse. But in the context of the fight against the pandemic, the vaccine production, but also IPCEI, I think we've had a number of very good discussions. That hasn't been very easy at the beginning with regards to IPCEI, but I think that we have actually created an added value with that. We have had very clear exchanges. We have seen that there are very clear needs, and I think we can definitely confirm that Germany is actually going to join. And I think that Germany can still join us in the second round, even if they perhaps missed the first one. And obviously we do have a number of countries with important industrial regions and pharmaceutical regions. Belgium, for example, is not one of the bigger countries, but still an important region for the pharmaceutical industry. Therefore, I'm very optimistic to have further interesting discussions with regards to that. Perhaps just one more remark, again, with the focus on the 14 ecosystems. We also work on transition pathways for the different ecosystems, and together with those impacted, with the industry representatives and stakeholders, we would like to see how we can tackle the three large challenges. And this is with regards to digitalization on the one hand, the ecological transition, the green transition, and the resilience, the promotion of resilience. These are the three big pillars that we identified, and here we have actually already worked on a number of areas. For tourism, for example, we have already published one of these pathway strategies, and now we are actually looking at different industries in order how to tackle these challenges. I think it is a good path, since that way we can bring together governments, institutions, but also industrial stakeholders to discuss where are the issues, what bottleneck problems exist, so that the transition can be done in an efficient manner. And this is also about identifying practical aspects, and therefore this is very much a bottom-up approach in order to create a transitional strategy for all of these different industries. Perhaps you wanted to ask a question, but I didn't want to respond, but Ms. Schreiber actually just brought up another idea that we haven't discussed. She just mentioned digitalization. European data health space is another topic where we can actually work very concretely on anonymized patient data, and where all of this patient data can be evaluated, but in an anonymized manner. This would, for example, help us to create faster approval procedures. And also with regards to rare diseases, it would be important. So because we would have very individual data sets, if we had this kind of data, this would also contribute to the attractiveness of Europe as a region for the pharmaceutical industry. And therefore, the topic of data in Europe is it is about the accessibility of Europe as the accessibility of data in Europe. And I think this will actually achieve results in terms of us coming forward. But actually, this is something that we can also discuss.
Volle Unterstützung. Wir haben einen Vertrag, dass so ein gemeinsamer Datenraum, Forschungsdatenraum geschaffen werden soll. Und wir haben jetzt in der
data room, and we are also we have also the Data Act, and I guess this would be very helpful for your company. I guess this kind of approach is very important right now at the European level. We are at a harmonic point, and I would like to talk once again about it. We have talked about money, financing, investments, and from the European budget, you can't have anything more, I guess. Now, would you say also at the different countries to invest more, because we are also talking about statal helps, and chips is very important. They are talking about more billions that are coming from the state. And if we have 43 or 49 billion, well, that's not so important. But this is something that helps us to go at the national level. And I guess, yes, we have some. You were talking about talents. It's not only about money. And I guess you should see this in a relative way. How do other countries like the US or China, and can we in Europe and in China, can we go with them or not? And this is the point where we have to intervene, and it's help, or is it CHIPS Act or CHIPSy, and where parts where you are working together. And we do need more of it in the European context, and also especially in Germany, because Germany is as important for Europe as very important. And if Germany gives the right signals, then all this will also go to Europe. Mr. Schultes, this is the possibility to clean up that dark dot. Well, what you have said, I don't think that the government would have anything against it. So, Mr. Kafsack, I'm sorry, but we do need the harmony in order to close our meeting. You have to admit that if you didn't manage, yes. And at this point, Mrs. Schreiber, and the two guests we have here, my panelists that are here in the representation of Hesse. Thank you very much for this discussion. Well, that was not as harmonic as I wanted to, but I would also like to give a short overview. Most of the things have already been done. First of all, thank you very much for the questions that have been challenging, I have to say, but it was a very interesting discussion. And honestly, Mrs. Schreiber said, during the pandemic we learned a lot. And we worked well together, and this cooperation during a crisis should be something that we should develop furthermore. And we have a sound issue here. Thank you very much. From my point of view, how can we enhance Europe and guarantee for this? And for this, we have to invest today in order to guarantee it. And on the other hand, once again, what I would like to see from Germany, really to invest in the health sector and to make this a common way for all of us, not only for Germany, but also there's also a signal for the rest of Europe. Now, before you close down everything, just two things I would like to say. We have two different digital meetings on agriculture from tomorrow, the digital leaders, and the next day from 13 to 14:30, the supply chain law. If you are interested, please come back and watch. Thank you very much.